The decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed.
The official results are in. The people of Britain have spoken, voting for a British exit, dubbed Brexit.
Now, the UK electorate has taken the historic decision to withdraw from the European Union.
3 years on since the biggest political earthquake in a generation, the UK is more divided than ever. PM versus MPs, people versus politicians, EU versus UK. Brexit is a battleground where everyone has lost. 2 Prime Ministers resigned, over 60 front bench resignations, a tired and frustrated electorate, and a question mark over the state of British democracy. In turmoil and chaos, the UK has been consistent with one thing: that each side of the Brexit divide thinks the other is a threat to democracy. But who's the real Democrat? And why has this debate become so bitter? Talking to the public, politicians and experts, I'll try and find out why, and hopefully offer a solution along the way.
We are going to have a Queen's speech, and we're going to do it on October the 14th, and we've got to move ahead.
On the 28th of August, the Queen approved Boris Johnson's plans to suspend Parliament under a process called prorogation. This led to the opposition being outraged, with cries of coup and dictator being lodged against the PM.
It's dictatorship.
Many Tory MPs defended the decision.
This is completely constitutional and proper.
But protests sprang up all over the UK. I went to the one in Glasgow to find out why this decision faced such a backlash.
It's wildly undemocratic. It's in support of a referendum result 4 years ago, especially considering that particular vote for Brexit was done to protect the sovereignty of Parliament.
I don't think that they should be able to shut down a democracy. Like, we've elected people to make decisions for us. They should be allowed to have their say. They can't just close down Parliament. In the last couple of weeks, I'm supposed to be something that people don't want.
Despite the protests and court cases, the PM maintains strong support from many Brexiteers on his decision to suspend Parliament. Robert Oulds, the director of the pro-Brexit think tank The Bruges Group, is in this camp.
There actually has been no attempt to limit Parliament having a say at all. Parliament has only lost 5 days. That is not a great deal. And what is Parliament meant to be doing at this time? Well, it wouldn't be sitting. So there has been no limit on Parliament having the opportunity to interfere. People getting, unfortunately, rather hysterical, making comments like dictator. Where are they getting that from? What we have is a battle to try and stop Brexit from taking place, to overturn the referendum. That's quite clear. People are open about that. Boris Johnson would be fulfilling the law and his election mandate if he takes us out of the European Union. But this is not one person taking us out. It's 17.4 million people. Surely we have to have the full other referendum respected first. I mean, it is a tool for a political agenda to overturn, to delegitimise the previous referendum result. It's saying your vote doesn't matter because you voted the wrong way. Calling people racists and bigots and so forth, that's a rhetorical device to try and delegitimise those who voted in a certain way. It's not really proper politics. It is the tactics used by demagogues to say that those who disagree with me holding power or us holding power are somehow deficient people, either mentally or morally. That's how dictatorships keep themselves in power. Quite simply, we leave the European Union and this would all be put behind us.
When Boris Johnson announced his plans to suspend Parliament, Nicola Sturgeon said it was any semblance of British democracy had died. I met up with one of her MPs, Chris Stevens, who voted against the triggering of Article 50 and for blocking a no deal, to ask, who's the real Democrat in this debate? As a threat to democracy?
Well, I think his actions are a threat to democracy. I think to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks, which has never been done for decades, if not centuries, where we have a situation where Parliament can't sit for 5 weeks at a time of national crisis, and when we're trying to resolve the Brexit issue, I think is a threat to democracy. He's trying to override Parliament. He's already suggested that he would override Parliament by not complying with the Parliamentary Act that we've just voted on, where Parliament's directed he has to apply for an extension if he does not have a deal after the European Council on the 19th of October. I don't believe that he's a buffoon or a clown, which some people try to paint him. I think he's a very dangerous individual. I think what he's trying to do, he's trying to maximise his political advantage because he suspects, as I do, that there'll have to be an election soon to resolve a number of issues, particularly now that the fact that the government no longer has a majority. The short-term thinking seems to be to try and get Brexit over the line. Courts and the Electoral Commission have said that there was breaches of law and breaches of the rules in terms of the spending during the referendum. You do have some of the claims which were made during the EU referendum are now no longer appear to be the case. The famous bus advert that you've just referred to, there'd been an extra 350 million for the National Health Service, has not really been, we haven't seen any of that. That doesn't seem to be guaranteed either. So I mean, I think the real issue for me though is that no one defined what leave would look like. There was never a booklet that would allow people to vote for the proposition as to what the UK outside the European Union would look like. Well, I can't see what was undemocratic or anti-democratic about going back to the people and asking the people to reaffirm the result or to reverse the result. I don't see what's anti-democratic about that at all. Because my view is that people are sovereign, and the Scottish people are certainly sovereign. I don't think we should forget that one of my parliamentary colleagues was murdered just before the referendum. Language is important, and how you express that language is important. And I think that people use social media, which is the equivalent of shouting at your car window screen. I tend not to do that, but I think we all need to be aware of the language we're using when expressing our political positions.
But what do experts think of the actions the Prime Minister has taken to get the UK out of the EU by Halloween? And what does this mean for the UK's democracy and constitution? I sat down with legal expert Dr Nick Mckerrel to ask.
Parliament argues, and many MPs argue, that they require the maximum amount of time possible to debate the issues before the 31st of October. And by taking the prorogation in the middle of that, they're taking a big chunk of time out of it. So the controversy is about the timing of it and the time of this big debate, but also the length of time of it, because it's on a long side. And I would add to that the fact that a Queen's speech just seems to be a distraction, because I don't think we've got a Parliament that's going to be able to get many laws through. The word constitutional is an interesting one, because our constitution in the UK is quite different from most other countries in the world in that we don't have a written document like a constitution. If you were in another country, you'd have hand them, that's your constitution. UK's not got that. It's scattered all over the place, the constitution. So it is constitutional for the Prime Minister to ask for Parliament to be suspended, prorogued. Because for the Queen's speech. So there's no law that says that's illegal to do what they're doing. However, they're pushing that to the limits. Mm-hmm. The length of time, the fact it's happening in the middle of the debate, the fact they don't have a majority, all of that adds to the mix of it not being quite right what they're doing. What he's done though, in quite a clever way, is use things that I would say are within the UK constitution, but he's pushed it to the limits of that. So the convention would be that you would only prorogue Parliament for a short period of time. The convention would be that you only call a Queen's speech when you have a majority to get laws passed. The convention would be that you don't suspend Parliament in the middle of a major political debate. But all three things have happened.
On the 24th of September, the UK Supreme Court ruled in a historic decision that the suspension of Parliament was unlawful in an embarrassing defeat for Johnson, who said he respected the decision but disagreed.
This court has already concluded that the Prime Minister's advice to Her Majesty was unlawful.
Many in the opposition called for him to resign.
This unelected Prime Minister should now resign.
And Nigel Farage deemed it the worst political decision ever and demanded the PM fire his chief strategist Dominic Cummings, who's thought to be behind the idea. Parliament was recalled the next day. I reached out to Robert Oulds after the ruling was made, and he told me he was not surprised because the legal establishment are against Brexit. He said, "The judges have stopped interpreting law and are now creating the law," echoing a growing sentiment among Brexiteers that the courts are becoming politicised.
The High Court last week came to a decision. What they said was this was a matter for Parliament, not the law and not the courts. And so how come these 11 judges have completely overruled that?
But
I would
that's
have
the
expected
legal
them
system.
to be...
Catherine Blaiklock, the founder of the Brexit Party, questions the impartiality of the Supreme Court judges.
We've moved into an American pseudo-political legal structure where basically courts are making political decisions. Then you take that, we've fundamentally yesterday changed the way that we rule. And it's terrifying. We can end up, if we carry on this process, I believe people like Gina Miller would like that basically people like myself or what they would call oiks or less educated people not to have votes at all. I think that's where it almost goes up. You also then start to have issues with who's going to appoint Supreme Court. You realise, of course, we didn't have this court until Tony Blair. So who's going to appoint judges in future? Will judges be purely political appointments? And that's where we're going leading. That's where this is leading to. Judges and courts should not be making highly political decisions. We will end up with a totally different system of government. We've changed history yesterday. We've gone to an American system where every Supreme Court, every judge is now a politician and is politically appointed. So when you get a Conservative government in, we will have Conservatives appointed. When you get Labour, and it will be stuffing the Supreme Court with things because we realise how important it is. I'm not particular. Of course, I would think that the decision was politically motivated because, I mean, I don't know what the breakdown is, but that particular class of people, I would say that probably about 90% of the judiciary are Remainers. So like with the BBC, it's going to be very difficult to find a balanced view. I mean, if you're going to have a Supreme Court make a judgment, then you need to get 50, and the issue is this, you're going to need to see if it's balanced like a BBC audience, the people making the decisions. So I don't think they should be, I think my point is that they shouldn't have been making that decision anyway.
So 2 points on that. The first is, do you have evidence that they sway either political view rather than just their demographics make up a certain percentage of this? And two, if someone does something illegal, politically or otherwise, surely that's within the court's jurisdiction to say, you acted against the law and we're going to tell you that you did.
Okay, you've got two different questions there. The first one is, what is law? Who makes law? Law is made by people. Law is political. Any judgment, especially in case law in Britain, where anything in law becomes the politics. Politics becomes the law. You can't separate them. The first point of the question is, the judiciary themselves will be very careful about what they say and what they will have written. We know, however, for example, from academics, that 90% of them, and these figures are well established. If we had a group of say Oxford College dons, heads of Oxford colleges, academics voting, we know that they vote something now about 90% Conservative and Labour, and they voted about 90% Remain. So the judiciary themselves will be more difficult to get the numbers from because they, by definition, are not allowed to make that point. We know, for example, on the Electoral Commission, and those numbers have been well established by Guido Fawkes, that approximately something like 80% of the Electoral Commission are Remainers and have made statements to that effect.
But not all Brexiteers agree with Robert and Catherine that the Supreme Court judges are biased Remainers.
Originally, when this case was brought, I didn't feel that that Gina Miller and her colleagues were right, because I thought that it wasn't really for the courts to interfere with parliamentary process, parliamentary procedure. There's been no precedent for that over the years. Now, the Supreme Court found that I was wrong. Now, you have a choice in this situation. You either accept the verdict or the ruling of a court, or you don't. You can argue the toss with a lower court, and I don't believe that we should have a country where you're not able to criticise the courts. What I think you shouldn't do is criticise the motivation of Supreme Court judges. They operate the highest court in the land. And the reason I have disagreed with many people on my side of the Brexit argument for their views on the Supreme Court is they seem to be implying that the Supreme Court is politically motivated. Now, I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe the judiciary is politically motivated. Just as if I interview a politician during a general election on my radio show, just as I leave my political opinions at the door of the radio studio, Supreme Court judges leave their political opinions at the door of the court. Now, this verdict was 11-0. Now, I doubt very much whether every single Supreme Court judge voted Remain. And even if they did, I doubt whether they were such ardent Remainers that they would risk their entire judicial reputation to make this kind of decision. Anyone who's read the judgment, anyone who's listened to Baroness Hale when she read it out in court, can surely understand the reasons that they did so. Now, fine, if you disagree with the reasons, I have no problem with people going through those reasons and explaining why. But I do have a problem with people who seem to think that it's perfectly okay to impugn the reputations of the judges themselves. And that's what's been happening over the last couple of days, and I think it's wrong.
I spoke with Tim Marshall, former Foreign Affairs editor at Sky News, to ask, is it fair to label your opponents dictators or traitors?
I think both sides are as bad as each other, chucking this, you're anti-democratic and this is a coup, that sort of language around. They're both as bad as each other, and it's both hysterical. And the ones who really believe that are very hysterical. The argument is that, this is how it starts, the steady slide towards dictatorship, as if someone has burnt down the Reichstag in 1933 so that Hitler can pass the Enabling Act to become the dictator. This is so far from that. I mean, all you have to look, when I watch the debacle in Parliament night after night, what I actually see is the British political system functioning, staggering around a wee bit. I understand that because we're in this awful time. But the British system is functioning and is going through everything in a legal manner without serious violence on the street. There is nothing in what any of them have done that is akin to a coup. I mean, a coup is not sending up privy councillors to the Queen for a decision which is then debated in Parliament. You know, I've covered coups. That's people getting shot in the back of their head, and people should really lower the language. I'm afraid we are some way from getting back to normal. And I think it's quite possible we won't get back to normal. I think it's quite possible the days of the traditional British way of doing politics may be finished. There are many people on both sides of this argument who are so passionately intense that they are absolutely convinced that their worldview on this issue is for the good of everybody. And you idiot, can't you understand that what you're going to do is going to wreck everybody? And so even though the majority voted to leave, you have to understand that this is a disaster and I'm going to save you from it. And so you can feel that it is, and I understand this, you can feel that it is the moral thing to do to ensure we don't leave. That's the moral thing to do, disregarding your vote. At the same time, on the other hand, you could say to yourself, yes, I've heard all these arguments, but I am so sure that if we leave, this is the best thing for everybody. That you are the ones that are having the coup by trying to stop me. You know, people are so certain of their morality that they, I think, lose a bit of perspective sometimes.
In the time it took me to make this video, tensions have only increased. One MP's office was attacked by a man shouting traitor, and when confronted by another MP who said Boris Johnson's use of language is causing him to receive death threats, the Prime Minister's chief advisor Dominic Cummings' response was, "Get Brexit done." Johnson has not ruled out suspending Parliament for a second time, and has stood by his oath that he'd rather be dead in a ditch than get an extension from the EU, despite a law requiring him to do so. On the Remain side you hear words like coup and dictator. Out of the view of cameras, some people talk of Brexiteers being too old, too bigoted or too stupid to make tough decisions. And on the Leave side you hear words like treason and betrayal. You see independent judges labelled Remainers and a view that the ends justify the means, so if the government has to break the law to leave the EU, then so be it. The last 3 years has mixed passion and frustration, and that makes for an angry discourse. Not only is the country fighting a political civil war, but our two main parties are fighting their own one as well. The UK is in a political era defined by frustration, hyperbole and division. Nobody really knows how to fix it, but it seems likely that it won't go away anytime soon.